Planet's Ransom, Chapter 26, Trouble at Taylor's. I lay next to Mitch, quiet for a long minute as we waited to see if we could get some clue as to what the Evenatch were doing. We knew at least one had left on the shuttle, and we were betting at least two had returned to the Heritage base. What we didn't know was how many they'd left behind to try and catch Mitch and me as we came in. We could just head straight for the base, I whispered. Leave them hanging? But Mitch shook his head. That would leave them to come in behind us, he said. We're better off dealing with them now. Right, I said, and rolled out of his arms. I heard him stifle a protest as I shifted away, but I didn't answer, and I didn't look back. I just crouched low and ran through the bushes so I could hide behind the next tree. Slowly, I worked my way around the terraced high ground, noting Taylor's carefully planted garden beds with regret. It sure would have been nice to keep them. When I got to the tree, I looked back and watched as Mitch did the same half-crouched run, but around the other side of the camp. We couldn't have done that better if we'd tried. Between the two of us, we'd be able to cover both angles, and I'd got him to let me work my own side without him hanging off my elbow. I'd call that a win. It was a short-lived victory, however. The Heritage weren't where we expected them to be. We should have thought of that. They had, after all, been doing this a lot longer than we had, even Mitch with his military training. We should have thought beyond where they might set up to meet us and thought through what they might do if they thought we knew they'd be waiting. It was a good thing these two started out by trying to take us alive. The first I heard of it was when Mitch gave a surprised shout. That made me stop and scuttle back to the tree I just left. And that wrecked the Evenatch's jump, the jump which would have seen it landing on my shoulders and knocking me cold. Instead, it landed in front of me, and it landed badly. It had been planning on landing on me and not 5 feet lower. I backpedaled away from the tree, raising my borrowed Evenatch weapon and pulling the trigger. Nothing happened, and my brain froze as I tried to work out what had gone wrong. I pulled the trigger again, making sure I was holding the weapon right. All the time I kept moving backward, watching as the Evenatch picked itself up off the ground and fixed its gaze on me. I watched its jaws part as it hissed angrily, reaching for the stick it carried on its belt. I was willing to bet that that wasn't an ordinary stick, and I didn't want to find out the hard way that I was right. I ran through the steps for firing and then remembered the safety. For that, I had to stop. I cast a quick glance at the Evenatch and then stopped and looked down at the weapon, keeping half an eye on the lizard. It didn't take me long to work out where the safety was, and I was lucky the lizard found that funny, because it took time out to laugh. It stopped laughing when I took the safety off. I'd forgotten these things could move that fast, had only got the rifle up halfway before it came at me with the stick. I saw it swing and was firing as I tried to get the weapon up to my shoulder. I don't know how many times I pulled the trigger before the stick connected and knocked the rifle to the side. If I hadn't slung its strap around my shoulders, I'd have lost it. As it was, I lost my grip on it and had to take several hasty steps backward to avoid the next swing of the stick. I'd missed, and I didn't have time to get the gun into position to fire again. Instead, I grabbed hold of it with both hands and lifted the strap over my head. I was going to throw it away, but the lizard swung again, and I raised the gun to block the stick. And then I slid my hands down to the barrel and used it like a baseball bat. That came as a surprise to it, but I didn't stop to enjoy the moment. Shouting and screaming, I kept swinging. I didn't even think about what might happen if it went off. This time, it was the Evenatch's turn to stumble back. I stepped forward, knocking the stick aside and jamming the rifle butt into the Evenatch's gut. That should have worked a lot better than it did. Instead of folding over the weapon, the Evenatch took a half shuffle back, absorbing most of the impact before it grabbed hold of the gun, which was when I saw it was wearing body armor. I said another one of those adult words the Evenatch frowned on, and it laughed, pulling the gun away from me as it swung with the stick. I ducked under the first swing, but I didn't want to let go of my weapon. The stick caught me on the shoulder as the lizard used the backswing to its full advantage. The impact of the blow knocked me into the embankment on the uphill side of the terrace, and then I found myself looking down the business end of my own rifle. Apparently, the Evenatch could hold them one-handed. I froze, staring up the barrel as terror raced through me. "Hands up," the Evenatch said, and I went to obey. My right hand went up okay, but moving my left arm made me gasp in pain. It took a bit, but I got it up anyway. "Now stand up." I managed that too, and wondered how I was going to get myself out of this one. And then I remembered hearing Mitch's shout and wondering if he had gotten himself into just as much trouble as I had. I watched as the Evenatch kept the gun up with one hand and tried to put the stick back in its loop with the other. I moved slowly onto my feet as I saw him miss the loop, and I knew this was the only chance I'd get. Like anyone who didn't succeed in finding their pocket, the Evenatch glanced down, and that was when I pushed myself off the embankment and straight into his chest, getting my body past the gun barrel as I did so. We were on one of the terraces. He went straight over the edge. I landed on top of his chest, and the gun went off beside my shoulder before he lost his grip on the stick and it flew off to one side. I would have been a mess if I'd been in front of that gun, but the lizard was in trouble. Body armor or no, I heard something snap, and he gave a cry of pain. I bounced on his chest, and he shrieked, but his head bounced off the ground a second time, and his body went limp beneath me. Figuring he had two free hands and might not take long to recover, I got off his chest and grabbed the gun. I'd get the stick later if I could find out where it had landed. And then, because I didn't know if he was going to get up and attack me again, I shot him in the head, which is another memory I didn't want to have. I was going to call out to Mitch when I realized I didn't know how many Evenatch there were, or where they were, or what had happened to Mitch to start with. I looked for something to hide behind until I could work out what to do next. That, and I really needed to not be seeing what I'd done to the Evenatch's head right now. I ducked behind the nearest tree, remembering to look where I was going and to look out from behind it once I got there. When I noticed the terraces were too close and might let another enemy come up behind me, I picked another tree and moved to that, and then another, so I could get closer to where Taylor's pod used to be. Slowly, I worked my way around until I could see that the crater left by the explosion was empty. I leant back against my tree and scanned the shrubbery leading up to the campsite, and then decided to see what had happened to Mitch. When I found him, he was being tied down over the back of some sort of snowmobile, except there was no snow, and the thing was sitting up on a kickstand a bit like a motorbike. He looked okay, except for the whole being tied up thing. I crouched down behind the tree and wriggled around so I could watch what the Evenatch that had him did next. It checked the knots it had made, and then looked toward the pod and the terraces. I swear it looked like it was expecting to see its friend any second. Yeah, I thought. Guess the female human isn't so easy to capture after all. This time I checked the safety was off before I fired. Notch up another memory I didn't need and really, really didn't want. Sorry, Mitch, I muttered as I ducked down behind the tree again. This time it wasn't because I didn't want to be seen. This time it was because I didn't want to see, and I needed a couple of minutes to get my stomach under control because we didn't have time for me to be throwing up when we had to get back to the Heritage base. I also figured that those shots would bring any more Heritage folk running. Better I was out of sight when they arrived. So I crouched behind my tree and I listened, trying to hear anyone arrive before they got anywhere near me. I'd been sitting there for a whole minute before I realized one very important thing. There had only been two, not snowmobiles, parked side by side. I am such an idiot, I said, but I still checked the area before I came out from behind the tree. Took you long enough, Mitch said when I bent over and began untying his hands. Yeah, and I love you too, I said, but my voice sounded funny and I was having trouble not looking at the Evenatch I'd killed. Thanks, Mitch said when I'd undone him and helped him stand up, and then he saw the dead lizard. Did you do that? I couldn't help it. I looked, and then I threw up. I threw it all up, everything. I threw up until I had nothing left, and then I said, yeah, thanks a lot for that. Like I thought it was all Mitch's fault. Like he'd made me shoot the Evenatch. Like I hadn't had a choice. None of it. None of which was true. It wasn't Mitch's fault. It was mine. And it had all been my choice, even if I hadn't done a lot of thinking before I did it. Because I'd known I wasn't going to be able to ask the lizard nicely to let Mitch go, or to let my friends go, or to let us live. Because I already knew the answer to that. And so I'd made the choice to shoot it. But I hadn't thought about it. I just pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. Easy peasy. And I'd do it again. And thinking about it made me throw up some more. You done? Mitch asked, handing me a bottle of water when I stopped. I took it, glaring at him because it was better than bursting into tears. Yeah? Where's the other one? And I looked at him and swallowed the water in my mouth, grabbing a mental hold of my stomach and keeping the water I'd already drunk in place. Over there, I said, waving my hand in the general direction of Taylor's burnt out pod. Mitch raised his eyebrows. He nearly got me, I said, as though that explained everything, and Mitch nodded. I'll just go and check, he said. Be my guest. I didn't get up. I didn't need to see the other Evenatch again, not when I could still see it in my mind. It would probably have saved time if I had told Mitch I'd shot the Evenatch in the head and now I didn't really have a head, but saying it would have made it real, and then I would have thrown up again. And I really, really didn't want to throw up again. I watched Mitch go and took another sip of water, and I waited, watching as he came back again. He held up the Evenatch's stick and came over to where I was standing. You okay? I took another mouthful of water and nodded. I did not look at the body of the Evenatch lying beside the so not a snowmobile. I swirled the water around my mouth and swallowed it. You know how to drive one of these things? I asked. He looked the snowmobile thing over and then nodded. Pretty sure it's a hover bike, he said, like he'd ever seen one before. I raised my eyebrows, but he didn't explain where he'd ever seen a hover bike before. Instead, he said, looks like it'll run the same way as Skidoo might, but we won't have to worry about rocks and things. You want to get us to the heritage site? I asked. Are you going to tell me the way? Your visor working? Yeah, then just say heritage. I said the last bit in Evenatch, and Mitch got it right after a couple of tries. Son of a, he began, but I cut him off. The Evenatch don't like that kind of language, I reminded him as I remembered to put the safety on my borrowed rifle. And Mitch grinned. Get on behind me, he said, and hold on, like I needed to be told.